You think you already know Henry VIII, don't you? The infamous king with 6 wives and the decision to found the Church of England, a symbol of power, a tyrant in love, a figure who appears constantly in schoolbooks. But if you stop there, you have only seen the surface of the iceberg, because the truth about Henry VIII is not dry pages of history, but a nightmare made flesh, a king who turned his own body into a disaster, with festering ulcers so foul that courtiers fled. A giant, living corpse haunted by power and fear. A man so cruel he forced his wife to watch her brother executed, before sending her to the scaffold. This is not the story of glittering castles or lavish banquets. This is the tragedy of a man whose rotting body mirrored the decay of an entire court, a palace turned into a prison, where every whisper could cost a life, where meals were no longer joy, but paranoid rituals of poison testing. And the ending, even more horrifying than all the rest. When the king died, his swollen body burst inside the coffin, leaving a sight that terrified the kingdom. The man who once claimed to rule by God's will ended as carrion for dogs by the roadside. Today, we will peel away the mask of splendor to confront the raw truth. Henry VIII, the king history calls great, but in reality a living nightmare, spreading terror from his breath to his final decomposition. Imagine it a king once celebrated for his muscular frame, his strong legs, his proud gaze. But over time, all that vitality vanished, leaving behind a swollen, blistered corpse, stinking and lingering on the throne. That was Henry VIII in his final years. A waist of 54 inches, larger than the height of many of his subjects. A weight of around 180 kilograms, 3 times that of an average 16th century man. But the most terrifying part was not the numbers, but how his body rotted day by day. Both of Henry's legs were covered with massive ulcers, always oozing pus and stench so strong that even passing by forced people to cover their noses. None of the courtiers wanted to go near him. They had to draw lots to choose who would serve, like a grotesque punishment of fate. And Henry did not suffer only in his body. The horse-riding accident of 1536 left him unconscious for 2 hours, in modern medicine, nearly a severe traumatic brain injury. After that fall, his temperament changed, his rages, his outbursts, and his obsession with power grew worse. Medical experts today believe he also suffered from Cushing's syndrome, a condition that caused uncontrollable weight gain, mood swings, and leg ulcers that would never heal. The image of a mighty king turned into a cruel joke of fate, unable to walk, forced to sit on special pulley chairs to be moved from room to room. And the tragedy grew even harsher. Henry lost control of his own bodily functions. Courtiers had to carry a special toilet chair, placing it beside him everywhere, because moving even a few steps could lead to an accident. And yet, even though his body had betrayed him, he was still the man who held the power of life and death over an entire kingdom. A king turned into a living corpse. But anyone who dared to mention his illness faced the death penalty. For Henry, to acknowledge the collapse of his body was to challenge the divine right of a king, and that, in his eyes, was treason. If Henry VIII's body was proof of outward decay, then his marriages revealed the rot within his soul. 6 wives. It sounds like a string of romances. But in truth, it was 6 tragedies written in blood and tears. Let us begin with Anne Boleyn, the woman Henry adored, worshipped like a goddess, and then, only a few years later, turned into the prey of a ruthless frame-up. He forced a musician close to Anne to confess to adultery under torture, and he did not stop there. Henry even dragged Anne's own brother into the false charges. Before going to the scaffold, Anne had to watch 5 men, including her brother, executed unjustly. Imagine that scene: a queen standing in the cold wind, watching blood spill across the grass, knowing that death was waiting right behind her. Then came Catherine Howard, a girl barely in her teens when she was forced to become queen. But youth was no shield. It became a curse. When Henry discovered she had once been in love in the past, he not only had Catherine beheaded, but also passed a new law. Anyone who married the king while concealing a sexual past was guilty of treason. A law written solely to satisfy his ego and personal humiliation. Catherine of Aragon, the first wife, was locked away within cold walls, stripped of the right to see her daughter Mary, a long, slow-living sentence. Meanwhile, Henry spread rumors that she had gone mad, a way to murder her honor without using a blade. Anne of Cleves, the one who escaped death, was forced to sign an annulment, pretending the marriage had never existed. She even had to thank the king for letting her live, a humiliation Anne swallowed just to survive. Even Jane Seymour, considered the luckiest because she died naturally after giving Henry a son, was not spared his coldness. Only 9 days after Jane's funeral, Henry was already planning a new marriage. His heart was never given to anyone, except power and selfish gratification. For Henry VIII, marriage was not love, nor companionship. It was a political tool, a psychological game, and sometimes a death sentence already signed. 6 women, 6 fates, all reflecting one brutal truth: to love Henry VIII was to gamble with your life. If Henry VIII's marriages were a spiritual hell, then his meals were a mad ritual, where the stomach became a weapon and greed turned into power. Picture an endless banquet table, covered with golden roasted suckling pigs, chickens, fish, mountains of bread, and wine flowing like rivers. Henry VIII consumed up to 5,000 calories a day, twice the need of a healthy man. And remember, in his final years, Henry could hardly walk. He did not eat to live. He lived only to eat. But the madness did not stop at quantity. Henry believed certain foods had magical powers. Eating swan would make him graceful. Eating venison would make him a skilled hunter. And eating oysters would guarantee his manly strength in bed. The result was feasts overflowing with superfoods of the Middle Ages, which Henry never tired of indulging in. Henry's meals were also royal theatre. Before any bite of food touched his lips, it had to be tested by multiple tasters. And not just a casual taste. The tasters had to wait at least 30 minutes after eating to see if they collapsed or not. During that time, Henry sat watching, his eyes fixed on them like a suspicious predator. When the ritual of poison testing passed, the feast began, not in silence, but under the gaze of hundreds of courtiers. They watched the king chew greedily, gulp down drinks, and sometimes the banquets lasted up to 4 hours. Food was not only nourishment, but a performance of power. I am the only one who can eat like this, and you cannot. Henry even issued bans on certain foods appearing at the royal table, not because they were harmful, but because they were too common. Turnips, barley, foods of peasants, were deemed unclean, unworthy to touch a king's lips. Thus, every meal became a bizarre ritual, where power, obsession, and paranoia mixed together. It was no longer eating, but a play lasting hours. With one-star actor Henry VIII, the king who ate as if he wanted to devour his entire kingdom. If Henry VIII's table was the stage of madness, then the palace was the giant prison of his obsessions. In his final years, Henry was besieged by the ghosts of betrayal. In his eyes, no one was trustworthy, not even his own family. At night, when the court was silent, Henry never truly slept. He lay on his massive bed, but under his pillow he kept a dagger, and beside him a crossbow already strung, ready to fire at anyone who dared approach. And if that was not enough, the guards stood watch inside his bedroom, right by the bed. Imagine the scene: the King of England, so afraid that he needed men to guard his every breath. But Henry did not stop at the bedroom. He turned the palace into a maze of surveillance. Secret passages connected room to room, not for convenience or romance, but so he could flee if assassins came. Tiny holes drilled into walls so he could spy on his courtiers. Rooms fitted with crude listening devices, just so he could eavesdrop on his own attendants. At the height of paranoia, Henry created a network of spies to watch other spies, one man monitoring another, until in the court, no one knew who was truly loyal. Every whisper, every glance could be twisted into treason. The Tudor court was like a vast, invisible prison, where fear itself was the only law. Henry even suspected his own daughters. Princess Mary and Elizabeth, children, were tailed, followed at every step. To an ordinary father, they were simply little girls. But to Henry, they were potential enemies, seeds of revolt against the throne. And so Henry struck before there was proof. People were beheaded, not for crimes committed, but for crimes, he imagined. Someone was killed because Henry dreamed of their betrayal. Another because someone else whispered, "He does not seem loyal." That was enough. One word, one dream, traded for a fallen head. The Tudor court, under Henry VIII, was no longer a place of glory and power. It had become a giant prison, where the ruler himself was the prisoner of fear inside his own mind. After many years of obsession and sickness, Henry VIII finally faced the one enemy no throne could defeat: death. But even in dying, he refused to let history remember him in peace. Henry departed in the most horrifying way possible. In the final weeks, his body swelled so monstrously that his skin stretched and shone like a water-filled sack. Each time attendants moved him with a special pulley chair, pieces of rotting flesh from his ulcers fell onto the floor. Behind him, servants followed with rags, wiping blood and putrid tissue, cleaning the trail of a breathing corpse. The stench seeped into the palace walls, so foul that even physicians, men accustomed to medieval gore, vomited. And then the day came, when the massive heart in Henry's chest stopped beating. No one dared approach to confirm it. His body by then was like a bomb of flesh, swollen with the gases of decay. Courtiers could only watch from a distance, whispering prayers, hoping he was truly dead. But the greatest tragedy came after Henry's death. His corpse was wrapped in lead, sealed inside multiple wooden coffins to lock in the rot within. They thought that would be enough. They were wrong. During the funeral procession, as the coffin moved from London to Windsor, the pressure of gases from the decomposing body built up. Along the road, the coffin burst. The cracking sound rang out, and fragments of Henry's rotting flesh flew across the inside of the funeral carriage. Worse still, putrid fluid streamed out onto the road. It was said that stray dogs came running, licking the remains of a king who had once declared he ruled by God's will. A man who claimed divine right ended as food for dogs on the roadside. And as if that were not haunting enough, many attendants who had directly touched Henry's body while preparing him for burial died only weeks later. No one knew the exact cause, but records of the time suggested they contracted disease from the rotting corpse itself. Henry VIII spread fear to an entire kingdom in life, and even in death. He left behind a legacy of decay that haunted those who had once served him. Henry's death did not close a dynasty. It opened a new chapter in English history, a legacy of blood, rot, and horror that centuries later still sends shivers down the spine. Henry VIII, in the eyes of official history, is remembered as a powerful king, the man who changed religion and shaped modern England. But behind that royal cloak lies the terrifying tragedy of a man consumed by his own body, mind, and obsessions. A body turned into a corpse, with ulcerated wounds so foul that servants fled. A tyrant who turned marriage into a deadly game, where women's love and lives were bargaining chips. A paranoïa banquet, where food became a charm and the entire court was forced to watch the king devour, as if it were a ritual of power, a palace turned into a giant prison, where every glance was a threat. Every word could mean death, and a rotting death, exploding inside a coffin, the final proof that no throne could conceal corruption. Henry VIII is proof of a cruel truth. Absolute power not only corrupts, it turns a man into his own nightmare. He spread fear in life and left disgust in death. A reign remembered not only for religious or political reforms, but for the image of a king rotting in both body and soul. You see, history is not only stories of victories and glory. Sometimes it is a dark mirror, reflecting all the decadence and decay, and Henry VIII is that mirror. If you think you already know the darkest secrets of kings, I think again, for history still hides countless shadows that no textbook will ever tell. And if you are brave enough to step further into that darkness, then walk with me in the episodes to come.